On Ireland's greatest robberies, we look back at some of the biggest heists to have ever taken place in this country over the last 35 years.
Nobody at the bank knew that by the end of the day this would go down in history as the most infamous bank in Belfast and would be the most audacious raid in the history of bank robberies nearly in the world. It was so well executed.
The FBI were involved, Scotland Yard were involved, Interpol were involved, the Dutch police were involved, even the Turkish Secret Service were involved.
Drop the gun!
We examine how these raids were constructed, from the precision planning through to their execution and aftermath.
Get on the ground! Get on the ground!
They carried out what is so-called tiger kidnappings. This is where you would stalk your prey like a tiger would and use your victim then to get the money out for you.
The gang held the family overnight. They absolutely, the fear of God into them.
Where are you taking her?
These robberies were masterminded by some of Ireland's most notorious criminals, and many remain unsolved to this very day.
Check the money out! Check the money!
It would have been a regular who's who of South Dublin crime at the time. The likes of Martin Cahill, Christy Dutton. They had the skill set required and they had the will to carry it out.
Tonight on Ireland's Greatest Robberies, we examine two profoundly different raids on branches of the Bank of Ireland throughout the country. The first happened in 1990, when a well-organised gang who had become quite accomplished at raiding branches of the Bank of Ireland were finally caught out by the Gardaí when they went to raid the branch at Emily Square in Athy in County Kildare. It resulted in one of the first major standoffs between an armed gang and the police. The second involves the tiger kidnapping of a family by a ruthless gang and the use of a young bank official to steal €7.6 million from the Bank of Ireland on College Green in Dublin city centre. In the late 1980s, there had been a sharp increase in armed bank raids throughout the country. Gangs saw bank robberies as a way to get money fast, and in a recession-hit Ireland, it was becoming an increasingly popular form of crime.
1989 was particularly busy year for armed bank robberies. There were practically one a week. There was of the order of 49 robberies, armed bank robberies in that year. And out of that 49, the gang that became known as the Athy Gang were responsible for 32 of those.
But 1990, it was the last year, one of the last years that we had armed robbery as a phenomenon, because in that year, the Gardaí took on the armed robbery gangs. To put it in sort of a perspective, in 1987, there were 600 what are called classified as armed robberies, between people with knives going into banks and what have you, and 500 of them took place in Dublin.
With this increase in armed robberies, one gang in particular was coming to the attention of the Gardaí. Suspected of carrying out numerous raids throughout the late 80s, the gang at the forefront of these heists became known as the Athy Gang.
The entity that we called the Athy Gang was headed up by a man called PJ Loughran and William Gardner, both former provisional IRA men. Loughran came from the north. They formed a team of armed robbers around them.
There were about 10 of them in all, apparently, but on the day of the robbery there were 5 in total, including Loughran and Gardner, and they were joined by Thomas Tynan, Brendan Walsh and Austin Higgins on the day.
These guys emerged around 1988, and they very, very quickly became one of the most prolific and well-organised blag teams that operated in Ireland at the time.
The Athy Gang were meticulous in their planning of the robberies they carried out, and tended to use the same strategy for the majority of their raids. The gang's quick robbery method and even faster getaway meant it was extremely difficult for the Gardaí to catch them.
Well, I suppose Loughran and Gardner were both involved in the IRA, so they used the experience that they had gained there in sort of meticulous planning. The thing about all these raids was that they were very, very fast. They arrived at the target bank. Loughran would pull up in the car, he would stay in the car, the rest of the raiders would be in, and they would be in and out within a minute or 2 minutes at the most, and a very fast getaway.
Their MO was that they struck mostly Bank of Ireland branches for some bizarre reason, and they were always in provincial towns, and they operated within a 100-mile radius of Dublin. Now at that stage there was no motorway network. They then had high-powered cars left at locations within, say, 10 miles of a town that they hit. They had all the back roads charted out, they knew exactly where they were going. So a lot of the time through the Dublin mountains. As I say, they knew every back road, they had it all planned out, and they were very good.
Well, the reason like that banks like Athy and areas like that were popular for hits, if you want to call it that, was because they were easy to get into. Traffic in the provincial towns wouldn't have been as heavy as perhaps it is today. They were within easy access of Dublin, and as well as that you wouldn't have had the same level of security in the banks as you have today, obviously, and maybe a slightly lower Garda presence than you would have on the streets today as well.
Towards the end of 1989, the Athy Gang were in the planning stages of their next bank raid. It was a Bank of Ireland they had hit several times before, located here in Emily Square in Athy. However, the gang didn't know that the Gardaí were already monitoring them closely, and that this was a bank job that would not go smoothly for the experienced raiders. The Gardaí named their response Operation Gemini.
Well, obviously there was a huge number of armed bank raids going down that year in 1989 and the beginning of 1990, obviously. And Operation Gemini was set up in response to this by the Guards through a series of intelligence operations, and that they were able to hone in on the gang, and in particular Loughran and Gardner, who obviously were the IRA guys involved in it.
There were several operations where they knew they were going to do a job on a particular day. They couldn't follow them because they were going through the Dublin mountains, and they were employing all kinds of anti-surveillance. And remember, in 1990, they didn't have the kind of technology that they have today, that they could watch them with a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle. They couldn't do any of that kind of stuff. But eventually the Guards found where they had a number of cars hidden, and they bugged one of the cars. And on this particular trip, they went down to the Bank of Ireland again in Athy. In September 1989, they robbed the Bank of Ireland in Emily Square. So they decided we're going to do it again because it was a big payday out of that. I think they got about 40 grand.
And slowly but surely, through building their information, they honed in on the gang and then set the trap for them in Athy. You know, they knew they were planning the raid, they had it all set up, and they were there to meet them.
As I was saying before, with raids, if you can pay in a constant amount each month, then that's the best way to do it. So it would be 12 months, it would be
On the morning of January 12th, 1990, 5 members of the Athy Gang drove into Emily Square in Athy, County Kildare, and pulled up outside the Bank of Ireland. It was just as they had done before during their previous robberies. This time, however, police had surrounded the town and were ready and waiting to make their move on the brazen criminals.
Well, it was a normal sort of Friday morning, 12th of January, not too long after Christmas. People were going around doing their normal business. Unknowns to kind of the local people, the emergency response unit were set up in the town hall in the fire station, which actually overlooks Emily Square, where the Bank of Ireland branch is situated. There was quite a bit of discreet Garda activity around the town. Other members of the emergency response unit were in a premises a little bit further down the street in Leinster Street, and then there were members of the serious crime squad around the town as well.
They knew they were going to do Athy. They had enough information in January of 1990. And they were due to do it on the morning of the 8th of January, if I remember correctly. It was a Monday morning. They didn't turn up that day. They actually went down on the Friday morning.
It came to about 20 past 12, half 12, coming up to lunchtime, when the gang arrived in the stolen BMW, pulled up directly outside the Bank of Ireland, 4 members of the gang went in, and Loughran stayed at the wheel of the BMW.
Move away, move away! Sit down, sit down! Look out! Where's the money? Where the money is? Stop! Sit down, down with the mouth! Hands on your head! Hands on your head!
As they came in, a guard was sitting in a car facing the Bank of Ireland in Emily Square, and he just basically gave the code word, "Eagle has landed, Eagle has landed." At that moment, the DRU got the order to move in. They blocked in PJ Loughran.
Fuck up! Fuck up!
Loughran took a gun out to shoot them, and they opened fire on Loughran and left him incapacitated. In fact, they left him semi-paralysed after that. That's why he was never convicted in court over it, because he couldn't stand trial, literally. And they surrounded the bank.
With one member of the gang already seriously injured and the 4 remaining members still inside the bank, the operation to bring down the Athy Gang was so far not going as planned for the Gardaí. What was to come involved yet more clashes between the unrelenting criminals and the police force. With chaos unfolding outside, the 4 gang members inside the bank began to grab customers and staff to use as hostages, before hastily making their way out of the building, which armed Gardaí had now surrounded.
At that stage, obviously, inside the bank, they had heard the shots, and they decided to take hostages.
The crew tried to come out of the bank, and they came out in a huddle. Austin Higgins was holding an M1 carbine up to the back of a bank clerk, the bank porter. They were trying to get into the back of a squad car. One of the police cars that encircled the getaway car, and he looked like he was going to open fire on one of his the hostages, and a guard fired a shot and got him right there. It was from a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver. It was a very neat piece of shooting. And Higgins was killed. He dropped dead.
What do we do now? Come on, you shut up! Stop playing! Shut your mouths!
With another of their men down, the 2 remaining gang members retreated back inside the bank, and the Gardaí decided that a different approach was needed in order to end the siege without any more bloodshed.
Next door in the Leinster Arms Hotel, the head of Gemini, Tony Hickey, phoned from there to the bank and initiated a conversation with Walsh.
Who's this?
This is Sergeant Tony Hickey. Yeah. Who am I speaking to? Okay.
This is the terms. This is what we want.
Right. Yeah, I'll get you an ambulance.
We're not going to agree to anything until we get a priest.
I'll get you a priest too, but listen, I'm going to need you to send out the hostages.
We let the 2 girls out if you send the priest for us. He has to walk in through those doors. They'll walk out those doors, and he has to walk in.
Okay.
Those are our conditions. Over to you.
Walsh demanded that a priest and an ambulance be sent to the scene, and Hickey negotiated that the injured would be taken away to safety, and that the gang members would hold fire while that was happening. He also organised with the local curers, Father Pat Mangan, who agreed to act as an intermediary and go into the bank.
This way. That's it. Come here. That's it. That's it. Come out slowly. That's it. That's it. All right, take it easy. Take it easy. All right, now put your guns down. Slowly on the ground.
Very shortly after Father Pat went in, the 2 men came out, one on each side of him, and obviously were immediately arrested.
That's it. Take it easy, take it easy. It's all over. That's it. Follow me. All right, let's get him into the back quickly.
Following the robbery, there was great shock in the local community and throughout the country at the events that had taken place. The aftermath raised some serious questions that needed to be answered, and not just from the remaining gang members, but even more so from the Gardaí.
I think the biggest shock probably was the fact that all of the shots fired had come from the Gardaí, and that the raiders hadn't in actual fact fired any shots at all. Because on the day itself, when I was down there, the understanding was that, you know, shots had been exchanged and that the raiders had fired several shots, and that, you know, everybody on the street was talking about the shootout in Emily Square, you know, whereas it transpired that all of the shots had come from the Garda weapons, and that was the biggest shock of all.
That was really a big milestone in the whole history of organised crime. It was the day that the cops took these guys on in a big way. There were a number of people injured that day. There were people down the street with buckshot from the pump-action shotguns. But it certainly sent a big message through to the gun gangs, because this new ERU thing scared the living daylights out of them. That these guys, the cops suddenly had a squad of fellas who were prepared to take them on.
When the initial controversy died down, you know, that all the shots had been fired by the Gardaí, and there were questions asked as to why they didn't stop the robbery and why they waited until the gang had gone in. But I think then there was, you know, there was some sort of recognition that they had actually tracked down this gang and had stopped them in their tracks, literally.
Although things had not gone exactly as planned for the Gardaí, and they had a lot of questions to answer, the standoff was a defining moment for the police. They had finally managed to take on the armed gangs with force and suppress the rise of organised crime in Ireland.
I think the Athy raid was kind of a watershed moment for the Gardaí. Following the raid, there were new training procedures, etc., put in place. It became clear to the armed raiders as well that robbing a bank wasn't an easy thing anymore. Up to then, they could run in and out within a minute or two and be on the road again, but this time they had met their match.
You can actually see then how it starts turning the tables. Criminals, the trend was then after that, is this really worth it? But it certainly was one of those turning points in the whole history of organised crime, the Athy Gang.
There were very different outcomes for those involved in the siege in Athy. One gang member, Austin Higgins, was shot dead. PJ Loughran, who was also shot by Gardaí, never fully recovered from his injuries, and as a result, he never stood trial. The remaining gang members, William Gardner, Brendan Walsh and Thomas Tynan, who had also been shot and injured during the siege, all received 12-year jail sentences for their part in the raid. Almost 20 years on from the Bank of Ireland raid in Athy, in 2009, Ireland was in the height of recession yet again. Unemployment was at an all-time high, and in April of that year, the government proposed a national asset management agency to take over large loans from the banks to assist in the economic recovery. As the banks were being bailed out and as unemployment rates steadily rose, so did the levels of crime throughout the country.
What you had at the time was a number of very wealthy and very dangerous gangs operating in the north of the city and indeed in the south of the city and across the country. They would carry out burglaries, robberies, but a popular choice for a lot of these gangs was also the tiger kidnapping and the bag robberies.
They had moved from the subversives in the north into the criminal sort of landscape inspired by the 2004 Northern Bank robbery, and which sort of seemed to plant the idea in criminals' heads that this was a very easy, effective way of getting huge amounts of money quickly. And so from 2004 they just took off.
During the mid to late 2000s, tiger raids were believed to be taking place at a rate of approximately one a week in Ireland. And it was an area of crime that the Gardaí were eager to crack down on.
What these gangs realised was that the weak point in the banks was often the person. And they carried out what is so-called tiger kidnappings. This is where you would stalk your prey like a tiger would and then jump on him and use your victim then to get the money out for you. And probably the most successful and most violent example of this was the 2009 raid on the Bank of Ireland on College Green.
Well, the bank in College Green is one of the country's main banks. It's a landmark apart from anything else. It's where the Houses of Parliament were. It's right bang smack in the city centre. It's opposite Trinity College. And it's one of the busiest banks in the country because it supplies Bank of Ireland ATMs that run out of cash right from there, from a depot right beside it, a very secretive place where the money is actually stored.
In 2009, the Bank of Ireland on College Green employed several hundred people. One young man who was working in the bank at the time was 24-year-old Shane Travers from Dublin.
He had been working in the vaults of the Bank of Ireland on College Green for approximately 2 years before the raid took place. He was the son of a very well-respected Garda who was based in Clontarf Garda Station, and would have been considered a very popular and well-liked employee.
He was going out with a girl, Stephanie Smith, and he lived with her in Kilteal in County Kildare, which is between Naas and Rathcoole.
There had been a recent increase in so-called tiger raids taking place in Ireland. However, Shane Travers could never have imagined that he would be targeted by a vicious criminal gang, and that his girlfriend and her family would soon become victims of a violent kidnapping. In early 2009, a robbery of immense scale was being organised by a criminal gang on the Bank of Ireland on College Green. Unknown to the bank's many staff, it was one of their own colleagues who was being targeted to help carry it out.
So on the night of February 26th, a Thursday night, Shane Travers was in his girlfriend's home in Kilteal in County Kildare. He was there alone, he was watching television. His girlfriend, Stephanie Smith, her mother Joan, and Stephanie's nephew were actually out shopping that day. And it was actually only when they returned home that the drama unfolded.
Oh, knackered. Oh, you just sit down there now. Well, what have you been up to since we left?
Watching the races. What'd you get?
It's claimed that the family walked into the house, and a short time later, as even I think the door was even still open, the gang burst in through. 6 members. They were heavily disguised, and they were carrying firearms, and they made a number of threats to Shane Travers and his girlfriend's family.
Keep your mouth shut! Get a fucking bullet in your head. Do not fucking move! Do you hear me? Don't move!
Well, the gang tied up the 4 people who were in the house and put them sitting together on the chair. Now, it was obviously a very frightening situation, and it was clear that something serious was going to happen. If there were any doubts that the gang meant business, it was clear that when they took out a vase and hit Shane Travers' girlfriend over the head with it, causing her a head injury, that they were violent and they were prepared to use violence. And they made it be clear that if they didn't get full cooperation, the whole people in the house were going to be murdered.
Right. You! With me! No! Shut up!
The gang held the family overnight. They absolutely put the fear of God into them. They threatened them. They told them what was going to happen next. And then they separated them. And Shane Travers had no idea what was going to happen to his girlfriend or her family or the child. And it was absolutely terrifying.
Once the armed gang had tied up the terrified family, they proceeded to hold them overnight, and as dawn arrived, they were taken away to an unknown location by the violent criminals.
The 4 poor individuals were kept in the house overnight. They didn't know exactly what was going to happen the following morning. I presume they had a good idea that it was connected to Shane's job in Bank of Ireland. So as dawn broke, Shane's girlfriend, her mother and the 5-year-old nephew were taken out of the house in a Volkswagen car. Shane was told, these people are going, and if you ever want to see them again, you need to cooperate fully with us. So he was then given instructions, detailed instructions by the gang as to what was to happen that morning.
Shane Travers was kept in the home. He was again told that that his family would be killed if he didn't comply with their orders.
As Shane Travers' girlfriend, her mother and her nephew were taken away, The bank employee was meanwhile being given strict instructions by the remaining gang members.
You're going to go into the fucking bank and you're going to get out as much money as you can, right? You're going to meet one of the lads, hand over the money, okay? If you do that, your family don't get hurt. Okay? Have you got that?
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Come on.
What the gang members told Shane Travers to do was to go into work the following morning as normal, to make his way towards the vaults and to take the cash from there and then deliver it to a location in North Dublin. Now, he was given a photograph of his family with a gun pointed to their heads, and he was told to tell anyone who got in his way that this was what was happening, that he needed to get this money out and not to alert the Gardaí.
In fear for his girlfriend and her family's safety, Shane Travers knew that he had to follow the gang's orders, or he might never see them again.
Shane Travers was told to go about his business as normal and do what he would do on a normal day, so he got ready for work, showered, got dressed, got into his Toyota car and drove from Kildare up to Dublin, a journey that would take around an hour in total. So you can only imagine what was going through his head as he drove up through heavy traffic.
Shane must have been in an absolute frantic state. On the one hand, he had to give the lie that everything was calm and normal so as to get into the bank without arousing suspicion. He probably thought he was still under surveillance, and on the other hand, he didn't know what had happened to his girlfriend or her family. He didn't know were they alive or dead. He didn't know what tortures had been done to them.
At approximately 6:45 a.m. on the morning of February 27, 2009, Shane Travers arrived at College Green in Dublin city centre and was about to carry out a robbery which he never imagined he would be able to do.
Well, he arrived in Dublin city centre and parked his car in his car park space. Although Bank of Ireland College Green is known to members of the public as a bank, he actually worked next door at the cash clearance centre, which is where all the cash for Dublin and Leinster ended up from the bank. So the thieves are very clever in that they knew there would be millions of euro in the safes there, so they had carried out high-level reconnaissance and had intelligence as to what happened in the bank, so they knew what they were dealing with. It wasn't to go in like a normal bank robbery with a gun and get a couple of €100. These people knew that there were millions of euro in the vaults.
Hey, bud. How are you? You good?
Yeah.
Once he had made his way into the bank, Shane Travers tried to act as normal as possible by going about his daily work. He then approached one of his colleagues to tell him what had unfolded over the last few hours and to essentially ask for his help.
Any news? Can I see you for a sec?
He went in there out of his mind with worry and traumatised, and when he approached that colleague, he was finally able to tell someone what was going on.
Something happened last night.
Yeah?
I need this to stay between you and me. Okay. There was these lads came to my girlfriend Stephanie's house and they tied us all up last night. I can't explain, but they told me I need to rob the place. They told me I need to get some money. I don't know. I need your help on this. They have her mother and they have her nephew.
Oh my gosh.
And I don't know what to do.
He went to one colleague and pulled out the photograph of his family and said, "My family are being held hostage. I need to remove large amounts of money from the safe." He was obviously very upset, but at the same time very determined that he needed to do what had to be done if he wanted to see his family again. So his colleague had no other option really but to cooperate.
Having gone through an extremely traumatic few hours and fearing the worst for his girlfriend and her family at the hands of a callous gang, Shane Travers knew that if he didn't go ahead with the raid on the bank as ordered, there could be serious consequences. And that was a risk he wasn't willing to take. In February 2009, 24-year-old Shane Travers, a junior bank employee from the Bank of Ireland on College Green in Dublin city centre, had been ordered by a ruthless gang to collect as much money as he could from his place of work. Or, as he was warned, his girlfriend, her mother and her nephew could be seriously injured.
They took him away in this car. I don't know what they're going to do to him. I think Stephanie's hurt as well, and we need to do this as fast as possible before anyone else gets hurt, okay? So, are you on my side?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can we get something just...
Shane's colleague agreed to help, and so they proceeded with great haste to the area where the cash was stored. They had a laundry bag to stuff with cash.
He was ordered actually to fill it with 20 euro notes, 50 euro notes, 100 euro notes and 200 euro notes. This took only a short amount of time, and he then left the bank with this bag and returned to his car.
So what are you going to do? I have to meet him at a car station, and they said they'd ring me, so I should have to bring him to this. Yeah.
Okay, go. Thanks.
While this was happening, his other colleagues were unaware that anything untoward was going on and just went to work as normal, because I suppose the more people that knew about it, the more pandemonium there would have been inside the bank. So it was quite professional, and they just went about their business, filled up the bags and did exactly as they were instructed to do by the criminals, because Shane was in such fear that his family would be harmed if he didn't.
The whole thing happened very, very quickly, because by 7:30 he was in Clontarf railway station as per instructions.
Once he had completed the robbery, Shane Travers made his way out of the bank and headed back to his car. Although he was carrying several laundry bags filled with just under €8 million, he attracted no suspicions from passers-by, and Shane continued on to his next stop, Clontarf railway station.
Once he got into the car, he followed the gang's instructions to travel to Clontarf, where he met with one gang member. Here, the gang member took Travers' keys to his car, where the money was inside, and left Travers standing there. He fled from the scene in the car, and this car was later found burnt out near Glasnevin.
What's meant to happen when a tiger kidnap is underway, that a button is meant to be pressed in the bank and the guards are meant to be immediately notified. Pierce Street Garda Station is only literally yards away from Bank of Ireland College Green, so guards could have been there within minutes. Also, the emergency response unit are trained to react to tiger kidnaps that are ongoing, but for whatever reason that day, protocols weren't followed, so nobody was informed. So the money was just stuffed into the laundry bags, and bank management hadn't been told about it. So that would prove to be very contentious later on. But I suppose you're dealing with humans here, and if you have a family and you're working and you're just making an average industrial wage, if somebody says, my family are going to be murdered, what are you expected to do? You're under severe pressure, and you don't want to see any innocent people killed.
As soon as the gang member had driven off with Travers' car and the €7.6 million in banknotes, the bank employee made his way to Clontarf Garda Station to report the events that had taken place over the last 24 hours, and that his girlfriend and her family were still missing.
Travers then walked into Clontarf Garda Station, where his father was actually stationed. It was only at that point that the alarm was raised, and this has caused, I suppose this was a bone of some discussion in the aftermath. It's believed that the bank didn't follow standard protocols for dealing with tiger kidnappings in this case.
No, I just went in as normal, and I asked Colin if he could help me get the money out, because if I didn't know what would happen.
Did you alert anyone else?
I just kept it between us, and then I came to you once the money was dropped off. I came straight to you.
Okay.
Around the same time as Shane Travers went to the Garda station, a call was made by the gang members to those other gang members holding the family, and they were told to release them. And the distressed and traumatised and injured mother, daughter and nephew, grandson then flagged down a car and got a lift to the Garda station in Ashburn, County Meath.
In the days following the robbery, a huge investigation was launched, as it was discovered that the total amount taken was €7.6 million, the largest amount of money ever stolen from a bank in the Republic of Ireland. As a result, the Gardaí were determined to leave no stone unturned in their search for the criminals, who had managed to steal such a large amount of cash without even setting foot inside the bank.
Well, within a few hours, Gardaí had prime suspects for the tiger kidnap. They knew who was responsible. It was a gang of criminals from the north inner city, led by a veteran criminal who's carried out several audacious robberies going back to the 1980s. He's an expert planner of robberies, so they knew who was responsible. So in that sense, they had a lot of intelligence, and They knew that the money was probably being held at a safe house and that it was being broken up to be hidden.
So the following day, Gardaí put in place a major operation around the city to try and round up the suspected gang who carried out this attack. The arrests were kind of concentrated around the Phibsborough area of Dublin, and I believe that there was six men arrested and 1 woman arrested. This would have been the core of the gang. Serious members, serious criminals were arrested as part of this.
One man, Darren O'Brien from North Strand, pleaded guilty in the courts to handling the 1.7 million of the money that had been acquired. It actually told an awful lot about how the gang operated in that. Obviously, they split the cash up and paid certain individuals to just hold it. And Darren O'Brien was the first of these. His crime, if you like, was minding the cash for them.
Darren O'Brien was jailed for 12 months as a result of this incident. He was one of only 2 men convicted of this crime.
A man called Mark Donoghue from Longford was arrested on the M50. When Gardaí searched his car, they found €1.75 million worth of the notes that had been taken from the bank. He eventually pleaded guilty to laundering cash. Now, he claimed he was an innocent man and had only agreed to hold on to the money and was to be given a fee of €5,000, and the criminals were to come the following day and to take the money off him. Now, he is not a major criminal, but nevertheless, he received a 5-year jail sentence.
Amid the investigation, there was also huge shock from the public and in government circles that the robbery of €7.6 million could be carried out so easily from one of the country's main banks. And questions were raised as to what protocols the banks were following that such a raid could take place.
There are some concerns in relation to the way in which this took place on this occasion. I'm not in any way critical of the people involved, but I think there is an onus on the banks and the financial institutions generally to ensure that any gaps that now are shown from this particular incident are closed and closed very tightly.
There was absolute outrage from the government and specifically the Minister for Justice at the time, Dermot Ahern, that such a huge robbery, €7.6 million, could be taken and that people's lives could be ruined, and that obviously the robbers were so audacious that they were going for the weakest link families. But there was also anger that protocol hadn't been followed and that the Gardaí hadn't been alerted sooner, which can't have been much comfort to the family who were actually in that situation.
The fact that one man could go into a bank and come out 10 minutes later with €7.6 million worth of money, there was obviously systemic failures and issues that needed to be addressed in the bank, such as such a large amount of money being available in safes and in bank vaults.
The bank's chief executive, Richie Boucher, had been appointed about 2 days before the heist, so it was an absolute nightmare for him to have to deal with just as he was starting in his new job. And he immediately wrote to all staff members, reminding them that there were protocols that had to be followed and reminding them that the money wasn't insured from the bank's point of view if procedures weren't followed.
Things have tightened down since, and now if a robbery takes place, trackers are placed inside the bag, the emergency response units are deployed within minutes, and there's been several incidents over recent years where criminals have actually been caught while the raids have been taking place because protocols have been followed and the guards have been told while a robbery is underway. So that's a very significant development.
After the robbery took place, there were a lot of changes and heightened security measures introduced, and less bank staff were allowed access to large amounts of cash, and less vast amounts of cash was kept in storage in one location. So the banks went to great lengths to make sure that they'd never see the like of that again.
People tell me and sources tell me that this gang got very lucky. They got very lucky. There was a number of occasions where they could have been caught. Things just seemed to go right for this gang, and that's what you will notice with a lot of raids down through history. They will have all the planning done, but they also need that element of luck to carry out the operation in this case, and it would appear that on this case they did.
Along with the search for the gang who orchestrated the raid, the Gardaí ran into great difficulty trying to track down the millions of stolen euro, with almost half of the money remaining unaccounted for to this day.
To this day, none of the extra cash has been found. There's still about €3 million that's missing, so it worked out as a payday of around €500,000 a man.
Gardaí have often speculated about where it went and how it was gotten rid of, but certainly not much of it has shown up. So that is still out there today. Maybe it's buried, maybe it's been spent across Europe, maybe it's been used to buy drugs for this gang, but it still is out there.
It was a very lucrative robbery, a well-planned robbery, and will probably go down as one of the most infamous robberies in Irish history.
The raid on the Bank of Ireland branches in Athy in 1990 and College Green in 2009 had very different endings for both the gangs and the Gardaí. The raid in Athy changed the face of organised crime in Ireland, as the Gardaí proved that they could take on these violent criminal gangs throughout the country. However, the robbery in College Green in Dublin city centre showed that gangs had found new ways to manipulate the system, proving that as long as they were active, criminals would continue to find ways to carry out some of Ireland's greatest robberies.